So we are gathered here this morning and on a regular basis throughout the Archdiocese monthly to pray for the cause of life. And we who are here and parts of the pro-life movement, I think we all know that this is the single most important human rights issue of our day. This is the issue before our nation, before much of the Western world. And thank God it's actually not much of an issue in Muslim countries where life is respected, and in other parts of the world where abortion is not at all legalized. But in much of our Western world, and it's spreading in different parts of the world, we have this great sin and tragedy of abortion. Abortion being considered a human right. And I've done a lot of prayer and reflecting, trying to understand the mentality of those who sincerely hold these views. They're not all bad, evil people. Many very sincere people, though, hold these views, and if anything, it's a great blindness that they cannot see the dignity. They want to uphold the dignity and rights of women, but they forget the great dignity of all human life, the life of the unborn child. And so this is really a significant issue. 150 years ago or so, there was still slavery in the United States of America, and we could find it hard to imagine how could they not see? How could people not realize the dignity of African black people, that they are fully human? And yet we're not seen as fully human or having the rights of persons in a democratic society. And even only in the last 100 years too, women were not allowed to vote. There wasn't a lot of education for women. That's why we look at Afghanistan today and we find it boggling to think, why are the Taliban so harsh about not wanting women to be educated? We just consider that's just not right. That women should not have the freedom to be educated, the freedom to pursue careers, even outside the home, if that's what they choose. Takes nothing away from necessarily the dignity of motherhood. Not all women are called to be mothers. We've always recognized that as Catholics with the gift of consecrated religious life. And so in our day and age now, we take for granted women being professionals and women being educated and women voting, and all people in our society recognized as human beings, except the child in the womb. And for those of us in the pro-life movement, we have to fight against the tendency, because we see it so clearly, to get so angry at those who don't see it. Like, what's wrong with you? I think we just want to shake them at times, right? And get upset and angry. Why can't you see this? It seems so true, so obvious to us. But I think, like Jesus, we have to have the humility to pray, Father, forgive them. They know not what they are doing. Jesus could pray that from the cross. You could say, well, wait a second. They knew what they were doing. They wanted this man dead. They wanted him crucified. But in one sense, they didn't know that they were crucifying the Son of God. And as I reflected at a deeper level, what came to me today was the whole issue of fear. I think fear is the number one motivation for most women when they have an abortion. It's fear. Just like the leaders who crucified Jesus. They felt threatened by him. They thought that this man was going to change the very nature of their religion. And he was, actually, but in a good way. But they were threatened by him. That's why they wanted to kill him. They felt threatened. And I think most women, we can't judge to begin with, but in general, I think most women who have abortions, it's because they feel so afraid. They feel so threatened by this pregnancy, unplanned, and they feel that child, and I think in many cases too, at one level they know it's a child, but they just feel so threatened that somehow this child is a threat to them. It's going to rob them of their independence. It's going to take away the opportunity for them to pursue their dreams, their goals. It's going to take away life, that this life will threaten their lives. And so it's a defensive posture. They feel they must have the abortion because it's just too threatening. And I think of the words of Jesus, be not afraid. I think that's what the Lord would want to speak into the heart of our culture today, not to be afraid of life. Human life is never a threat. It's a blessing. It's the greatest of blessings. And yet, not without sacrifice. And many of you who are here who've had families, even you will recognize at times, I know women have told me this sometimes, Father, I feel so guilty because, I'm so Catholic and I want to be open to children, but I feel so overwhelmed right now with the 2 or 3 I have, and now I'm pregnant again, and I'm so, it's hard to say yes to life. It's so easy to feel fearful that this child is somehow going to be overwhelming. It's going to be too much work. I'm not going to be able to do it. And therefore, it's easy to be afraid. And the Lord wants to say to all of us and to our culture today, be not afraid. Life, human life, even when it's not in the right circumstances, in a married state, if a human life is conceived, we know that God has always intended it. And that's the other great revelation that we as Christians have. I mean, on one sense, the dignity of the unborn child can be proven scientifically, we believe, and should be upheld just on a purely human level. But we do know that our faith adds so much more because we see in the creation of a human life not only the act of sexual intercourse between 2 adults, but we see the direct sovereign act of God to infuse a soul into that person from the moment of conception. So that God chooses that being, has created that being. And we are only co-creators with God, who is the source of the life and the dignity of that being. And the dignity is not just a human dignity, but a supernatural dignity, because that child has been given the gift of a supernatural life, a soul that will live forever. And so but again, when we see that, we can see that how could this at all be a threat and not a blessing? Again, when I say a blessing, of course not without necessary sacrifice. And in fact, I kind of chuckle because I think it's God's great joke that most married couples, I think, have no idea what they're doing when they get married. Because they're in love. And they don't realize the incredible sacrifice that is going to be asked of them to lay down their lives for their spouses, first of all, who they will discover very quickly are not near as perfect as they thought they were when they first fell in love. And secondly, for their children, who especially in the first years of life are totally dependent on them and call for the greatest sacrifice of their lives. I think if people really knew that, given our fallen nature, our tendency to be more selfish and concerned about ourselves, many people would probably not ever get married. But thank God He's created this wonderful gift of romance to bring, and also just the great attractiveness, because deep within us we feel the longing in marriage for a companion and for someone to share our life with, which is good and holy and hopefully is what pulls us through our vocations. But that being said, life requires great sacrifice, but a sacrifice that ultimately blesses us. Because when we choose life, we choose God's blessing. Remember already God speaking through Moses, to the people. I set before you today life and death, blessing and curse. Choose life. You could say God is pro-choice. It's just, He's pro-choice. He gives us a free will. He wants us to choose, but He also tells us, but choose life. Don't choose curse. And that's what people in our culture don't understand, is that when we choose against life, we do not bring blessing on ourselves, but we bring suffering and we bring so much pain. And it's interesting, just in the last generation now, a great awareness that the victims of abortion are, besides the child, the very mother is a victim of her own abortion and suffers grave consequences. And so we in the pro-life movement are called to see our ministry as a ministry of mercy, reaching out to try to help people to see, recognizing that people are blind. They do not see, they're blind, and they're afraid. That's what was coming to me. Those are the two reasons people choose abortion. I used to think it's pure selfishness. I'm not denying it's there, but remember Jesus said, don't judge the heart. But I think we can say there's a lot of blindness and there's a lot of fear, because those are not judgmental. They're just more observational. Most people, it's because they do not see, like I said, the supernatural dignity of the child, and they're afraid. They're so afraid. They feel it will be a threat. They feel it will be overwhelming. They won't be able to handle it. It will so radically change their life and rob them of their dreams. And it will radically change their lives, but not ultimately. Any time we choose life, even in the most desperate of circumstances, we are opening ourselves to God's blessing. And again, families will testify, and I've seen it in many mothers who, in fear and trepidation, feeling, I can't handle anymore, and feeling overwhelmed. But as they say yes, and over the years, they look back and they say, thank God, my children have been a great blessing for me. Again, can be also sometimes a source of suffering when you see them straying, but still ultimately a blessing, because we see the incredible, unique life that is before us, that is made in the image and likeness of God. And we realize, wow, this is utterly amazing. And every life is totally unique. There's not one of us here that's the same or anywhere in the world. God has designed each one of us uniquely. And so every life is a unique gift and blessing for the mother, for the family, for the world in which we live. So brothers and sisters, we gather here today. Let us gather in great prayer, in great intercession, praying for our nation, praying for our land, praying for all mothers and mothers-to-be. They would see and know the gift that they carry within them, and also that they would have the courage to say yes and not to be afraid, but to put their trust in the Lord, knowing that God never gives us more than we can ultimately handle. And not only that, but whatever God gives us is ultimately a blessing. Even if it involves the cross, which it often does, it's meant for blessing. So we pray for that today as we continue with our liturgy.